So my NTRAk module is kind of done, and not completely done, but enough so that I think I can bring it to a show. One of the things I really wanted to do is to make this river. The river is what divides. I have two modules. The river is what divides the two modules together. So I got a total of 8 feet, and each module is 4 foot each. And the river is basically just sitting here underneath the bridges. And to make it, this is what I did. One, you have to buy your wife some roses. I'll explain that in just a second. But the piece of plywood that I cut out of here is what I used as the base to the river. Then, after I'd used that, I took the box from the roses, and the cardboard was long enough so that I could use that cardboard for a spacer or a mold form on the outside, and I stapled that to the plywood so that I had like a form that I could use the Sculpt-A-Mold. I used Sculpt-A-Mold to mold the shape of the river. So I made that, and that took a couple weeks for the water and the Sculpt-A-Mold to kind of dry out. And then once I had the Sculpt-A-Mold dried out, I had to put this back in again, and then I kind of tried to fill in to where the cracks are. There's a problem that I had with this method we'll talk about in just a minute. So once all the Sculpt-A-Mold was hardened, I used the wash technique that I used on the rocks to paint the outside edges of this so that anything that didn't get covered would have this little rock kind of coloring to it on the outside. Once I had that paint done, I painted a little bit of black down the middle so I get the depth. And then I used Mod Podge to glue in these rocks, these little tiny pebbles that I got out of the St. Lawrence River. And then I glued those rocks in place. Once the rocks were glued in place, I also added I used birch tree twigs because I kind of liked the way they kind of contrasted. And then I used Woodland Scenic murky epoxy pour for the water. And then I poured that in. And then once that was complete, I then added a little bit of grass around the edges in certain little bit of spots, so it kind of looked like some stuff got washed out and then some was growing. Big problem. Because the plywood was cut out, remember this is one big piece of plywood, the grain of the plywood is actually running in this direction. So my plywood grain needed to kind of run in this direction, and I kind of didn't take that into consideration, or the fact that it's only like the second or third time I've used Sculpt-A-Mold. I think the Sculpt-A-Mold had so much moisture in it as it was drying, and it took weeks to dry. It caused the plywood to bow. So the Sculpt-A-Mold was actually creating a bowing on the river, which actually pushed my bridges up. So to fix that, I had to, underneath in the plywood, I made little dados that I could drop in where they're sitting so I could kind of lower that. And it kind of distorted a little bit I have gray abutments here for my bridge, and it kind of got washed away out of building it. And it actually cut away because the river kept warping. Hopefully it's stopped and it's stabilized. The other thing I did too is I put Mod Podge and I took air compressor and blew, so I got these little ripple-y patterns in the water as well. But for my first river, never made one before, I'm happy with how it came out, but I was kind of disappointed in some of the little things, especially that warpage that occurred. Kind of drove me crazy because I couldn't figure out about the warpage, and then I finally remembered that the grain of the wood was running this way, and I think that's what helped cause it to kind of warp up. But I was able to adapt that, and I think it will stabilize over time. I'm just hoping that when I take these apart to bring to a show and I put them back together again, that I get the same pattern. I don't think I'm going to, because of the fact that just tripped over something. We have legs that are, all individually adjusted. It's going to cause different levels in the table. So hopefully that doesn't cause too much of a problem. But you can see right now the bridges seem to be working fine. The trains run over them pretty smoothly. That's how it's going. But Like I said, um, most of the tracks, all the tracks run well. Not having any really issues. So hopefully that river stops warping and we'll be in good shape.